devices that would put you through the most pain and suffering, all the rules around marriage, and what would happen to you if you committed high treason. All of that on today's most amazing top 10 list. Coming in at number 10, we have the Judas Cradle. If there's anything that the Middle Ages was advanced in, it was how to inflict horrible pain on a person. Suffering and fear were great tools to govern people back then, and anyone in power back then would have wielded it to make sure that everyone was under their control. One of the ways that they were able to do this was through the Judas Cradle, a horrible device that was shaped like a pyramid. It would be placed under the bum of whoever was unfortunate enough to be placed upon it. It would be raised into the air, and then weights would be tied to the feet of the person to pull them down onto the pyramid. So as you can imagine, this sharp wooden pyramid would go up your butt. This would slowly stretch you from the bottom until you ripped open. This process would be slow and painful. Just the sight of this thing would strike fear into your heart. But if you were one of the people in medieval Europe who was in charge of administering this punishment, you would have bathed in their fear. Bringing them into the horrible room with the Judas Cradle would have enlightened them to the great darkness. And guys, make sure you hit that like button. Coming in at number 9, we have eating slugs. I mean, there wasn't a ton of food around, so sometimes you had to make do with what you had. But the scary thing about eating slugs is that it wasn't something you would do even if you had plenty of grub to go around. See, there was a discovery made back in the Dark Ages. It was that slugs could eat a plant known as wolfsbane. For those of you who don't know, wolfsbane has a powerful toxin in it known as aconite. This will give you a pretty slow and painful death, and it used to be used all the time. But someone saw that there was a certain species of slug that loved to munch down on wolfsbane. Now this would mean one of two things. Either the slugs were packed full of aconite and would kill you if you ingested them, or this would mean that these slugs have some sort of immunity that would help them break down the poison. So an experiment was done and a probably disgusting dish was made called slug soup. After eating the soup, it was revealed that the body would have an immunity to aconite. I would have hated to be the person who was the test subject for this experiment. First, you would have to eat a slug, and then you would have to get poisoned, hoping that your last meal would save your life, and if it didn't, the last thing you would have ever eaten would have been a slug. Okay, coming in at number 8, we have little sperm people. Okay, this one isn't really scary because of how horrible it is, but it's more of how stupid people used to be, and this one is kinda funny. So back when we knew very little about our reproductive organs, it was believed that there was already a baby in sperm. That a little baby lived in your sperm, and when you made hanky-panky with the lady, you sent it inside her body where the baby would grow until it was ready to come out. There were even old drawings of babies inside sperm. The funny thing is they did get the shape of sperm right. Maybe we just know in our hearts that sperm is a little raindrop shape. Coming in at number 7, we have marriage. When we meet someone now, we fall in love, and that will probably lead to marriage, or you'll just have a thing where you meet up every other weekend until you both fade to dust. But back in the Dark Ages, there wasn't the same kind of love. Actually, people rarely had a say in who they got to marry. This would happen when you were quite young, and you would be married off to strengthen your family. If you fell in love with someone who was not from much money, but your family was quite wealthy, then you better believe your parents wouldn't let you marry them. Why do you think there are so many stories written about forbidden love in this way? It's a little scary to think that you would have such little say over who you get to be with for the rest of your life. And back then, if you got caught cheating, it would probably lead to jail time. Coming in at number 6, we have no one breaks the law. If you broke the law back in the day, just like now, you would go to court. You might have to sit in a dungeon for an extended period of time before you were seen in court, but there was still some sort of system to give out justice. But one of the strangest parts about this was that humans were not the only ones who had to follow the law. It was animals too. There are several records of animals being taken to court to figure out if they were guilty for a crime. Now, you might think this is silly because it definitely is, but the crimes definitely weren't. More often than not, crimes were committed by pigs. And you're about to learn some stuff about the little pink food source that might make it hard to look at them the same way ever again. There are some stories of pigs killing people and then being taken to court for murder. Yeah, I could see how people would want to seek justice after one of their family members was murdered by a pig. You would be pretty sour if you came home one day and one of the people you love was gone because a pig pig got out of its pen and went crazy. Coming in at number 5, we have being drunk all the time. We are lucky enough to live in a time where it's a lot easier to get clean drinking water. Well, for some of the world. It's still shocking how much of the planet doesn't have access to clean drinking water. And because of this, we know that when you don't drink water that has been sterilized, you can get very sick. Well, that was definitely the situation back in the Dark Ages. Unless you found some running water coming down from a mountain, there was a good chance that the water could kill you or make you very, very ill. So people turned to the next best thing, booze. See, people knew that because of the alcohol content that you wouldn't get sick from drinking beer or wine instead of water. Well, you would still get hungover, but you wouldn't get cholera. I just don't think that would be the life I would want to live. Could you imagine? You spend all night drinking and then you go to bed. You wake up with a splitting headache because you're so hungover, and then the only thing you have to drink is more beer? I guess life back then was so hard you wouldn't even realize that you weren't feeling well. Coming in number 4, we have famine. If clean drinking water didn't kill you, then how hard it was to come by food might kill you after that. There were several famous famines throughout the Dark Ages that led to people getting very desperate. This usually led to people fighting with one another and areas being wiped out because there was not enough food to go around. And there was very little control over this. A slight change in the weather, too much rain or too little, the year being too hot, a fire breaking out, and in some cases bugs on the loose. Some sort of sickness or even war could lead to a poor yield and massive famine. Yeah, it was not an easy time to be alive. Coming in at number 3, we have going to the doctor. There are many ways you can seek help now. If you're not feeling well, you could go to a general practitioner. You could go to a naturopath. If you have some aches and pains, you could go check out an osteopath or a physiotherapist. There are so many ways you can get help now, but back in the day, going to the doctor could have been one of the worst things for your health. Doctors back then practiced some pretty primitive ways of healing people, like bloodletting, where they would drain blood from a person's body because they thought you had bad blood. It would be like, no dude, I need the most blood possible. If anything, I want extra blood. Well, that is probably bad too, but I don't know the science. Something else they would do was trepanning, which was drilling a hole into the head, which was supposed to help with mental illness. Think of a lobotomy, but even more graphic. Coming in at number 2, we have executions. There's a lot of ways people would take you out back then. If you were seen as guilty of a crime, there would be a good chance that you would be taken to a guillotine and have your head removed from your body. This was the fastest and easiest way to get rid of people who were given the death sentence. But believe it or not, those were the lucky ones. It would seem that people who committed crimes against the crown, like treason, would have a fate worse than death. Those people would be dragged to the streets by a horse, and that wasn't even to kill them. That was just to get them to the place where their fate would have been finalized. Once they arrived beaten and bruised, they would have some form of prolonged painful death, like a slow hanging, pulled by horses, disembowelment, or all of the above. The people would be reminded that anyone who tried to cross the royals would wish they hadn't. Again, fear was the best way to keep people in line. And coming in at the number 1 spot, we have the Black Plague, probably one of the most tragic moments in human history. The hardest correction that any disease that we know of has ever been able to hit mankind with. People being extremely unclean, rats running through the streets, a lack of proper sewage, no understanding of cleanliness. All of these things led to the Black Plague. A disease running through poop and dead bodies was able to mutate and attach itself to rats. Those rats ran through the streets endlessly to spread it, and nearly every person in Europe caught it. People would get boils all over their body. Their breathing would become labored. They would have blood and pus leak out of every inch of them before they passed. Bodies were burned in mass to try and contain the sickness. People thought that it could have been an act of God, something punishing them for who knows what. Eventually, the Europeans were able to push through this, but not before it took out 1/3 of Europe. It's suspected that this wasn't the last they saw of this plague. The London Plague could have been the same strain of the sickness, as well as several other small outbreaks that happened over the next few centuries. Alright guys, that has been our list. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I've been your host, Shaderana, and we'll catch you on the next one.